I would like at least to introduce the speakers for those among the audience who didn't have a chance to read through our online program. So Giacomo Tagliani is a research fellow at the University of Palermo, and previously was a visiting assistant professor in film and Italian at Dickinson College, and taught film and media studies at the Universities of Salento and Calabria, and at Middlebury College School Abroad. His most recent publications include 2 monographs about Italian biopic and political cinema, as well as essays on Fellini, Montage Theory, and the images of terror and terrorism. Angela MAIELLO, our second speaker, is a researcher, is a postdoc researcher of film and media studies at the University of Calabria. Her research is mainly focused on media theory, digital culture, and television studies. She's the author of L'Archivio in Rete, 2015, Gomorra, la serie, La famiglia, il potere, lo sguardo del male, 2016, Mondi in serie, l'epoca postmediale delle serie TV, 2020. And she's also the Italian translator and editor of Radical Mediation by Richard Grusin in 2017. Lucia Di Girolamo, who holds a PhD from the University of Firenze, is currently also a postdoc researcher of the University of Catania. Between 2009 and 2013, she directed the CinemaScope IFJ, and her main research interest focuses on the recovery dynamics of cultural survivals in silent and contemporary cinema, on the cinematic and television representation of the South, and on the representation of women, and that's it. In 2014 she published Il cinema e la città, identità, scritture e sopravvivenze nel primo cinema napoletano. In 2015 Per amore e per gioco, sul cinema di Pedro Almodovar. And in 2017 she edited Romanzo Napoletano, a collection of unpublished photos of silent Neapolitan cinema. And last but not least, Massimiliano Gaudiosi is also a research fellow at the University Suor Orsola Benincasa in Naples. His research interests include film theory, film analysis, and media archaeology. He co-authored with Augusto Sainati Analizzare il film, 2007, and more recently Lo schermo e l'acquario, scienza, finzione e immersività nel cinema degli abissi. He also published essays in film journals and edited books. So we have plenty of time for the discussion, and maybe just to get things started and prompt some more questions, I would like to address a couple of issues. First, a question for Giacomo. I found brilliant the issue of how to portray, to depict the matter, how to convey the matter in itself. And as you were presenting the films by Ubaldo Magnaghi and others, it came to my mind that most of the times, as you very clearly described, they focus on infrastructures much more than on the matter. But I was wondering, it came to my mind a film by Alain René, Les Champs du Styrène, which is entirely focused on the production of plastics and is associated with the commentary by Raymond Queneau. If anything alike might be found in Italy, so much clearly focused on the changing matter, because deploying an incredibly innovative visuals. So I was wondering whether beyond this kind of alternation between infrastructures and matter, you could find within your corpus something which is just entirely focused on the matter and how it changes across time. And then I have some other questions. I don't know if you want me to, I can ask all of them at once, and then you answer me, or we can start a discussion altogether. So maybe it's more democratic, but no, I would suggest a more balanced approach, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So I have a question which might refer to both the papers of Angela and Lucia, because both of you, well, Angela entirely focused on tourism and non-fiction cinema in this binary between earth and sea, or land and sea, and she mentioned, or not clearly, but she focused on this corpus, whereas it somehow clicked something in my mind. The paper by Lucia, when she quoted the voiceover addressing the fact that the mermaids now appear just during the summertime. And I was wondering how much this focus on the seashores of the Mediterranean Sea in a southern landscape are somehow gendered, or how much they are associated with a sexual dimension of the female body as displayed on the shores. So, because obviously the depiction of southern Italy, notably the shores, has very much to do with the cultural heritage and the classic age, and the ruins as a key motif within Italian culture and visuals. But at the same time, the new mass tourism also deals with a sort of gendered image of the places. Or I was wondering if this also is conveyed by the films themselves. And for Massimiliano, a very last, not last, I have still one, but another question is, you've been discussing most of the films by focusing on migrants themselves. I was wondering if the films are also depict or portray the impact of migrants onto the society, which is including or excluding them. As we know, the very first book by, oh my goodness, that's Alzheimer's strikes me. Fofi, Goffredo Fofi. That was a major laugh. Yeah, the very first book by Goffredo Fofi is a sociological inquiry in the early 60s on the impact of migrants onto society in Turin. So I was wondering if these movies also show some concern about the inclusion or exclusion of migrants, and notably in Northern Italy. And a very last one, which is for everybody. Maybe we could start from that one. Giulio Bollati, in his book L'Italiano, at some point raises one issue, that is the fact that Italian culture lingers on the ruins because they show the greatness of the past, while at the same time doing away with the problem of dealing with modernity. So the ruins are crucial for displaying somehow a pedigree for our culture and society, and show that we were great and we still hold to that greatness. We can somehow circumvent or bypass modernity as industrial production, industrial infrastructures, and so forth. But I'm not so sure that the post-war cinema, as Angela very aptly highlighted, is entirely focused on the ruins. Most of the films you've been discussing at the same time highlight the importance of implementing entirely new infrastructures, and mobility is obviously crucial in that respect. So I was wondering, how do these films somehow cope between the need to display our mythological past and the need to display our modernity nowadays, or back then? Thank you.
I don't know if I go first, and if so, I would like just to quote a film released in 1950. if I'm correct, that maybe can keep together the answer to me and the answer to anyone. That is Sicilia. The title, the film is literally titled Sicilia, Archeologia più Petrolio. And actually, so on the one hand, there to visualize matter in this movie, we can see, for instance, some close-ups of the gurgles of oil, just running out of pipelines and so on, so small pipelines, but actually the focus is entirely on the oil. Oil as a raw matter that simply springs from the soil, from the earth. So these are on the one. But the other hand, the link and I mean the connection between the past, the mythical past, so antiquity and ruins, and I mean all the archaeological dimension of the landscape, and modernity is I mean clearly highlighted. Also, I mean, referring to the first, referring to the representation of matter, yes, as I tried to say in my presentation, obviously, representing methane is quite hard, just because methane is a gas. So there is a clear difference between these two different types of hydrocarbons. Whereas oil is easier to visualize, methane is clearly harder. On the other hand, there is a lot, many other kinds of matter that are involved in this kind of representation. I simply talked about methane and oil just because they more directly refer to mobility and forms of mobility. But for instance, steel or all the derivatives from oil are quite represented in the movie from the end of, between 50s and 60s. You mentioned René Lechandre-Styrène, and this is from 1958. Actually, in 1962, there is another techno film, Molecole Isotattiche, that is entirely devoted to the transformation of oil and oil in plastic. Actually, so it's focused on, the invisible side of matter, molecules, and also the possibility to transform matter into something else. And this movie deals with the cycle of production of this moplane. Many other movies deals with moplane, even Caroselli with Gino Bramieri and so on. So there is a clear focus on matter, starting from title. Another example can be the movie produced by Autostrade SPA for the anniversary, the 10th anniversary of the Autostrada del Sole, so 1966, that actually is about a giant infrastructure, but at a certain point it is clearly shown how this giant infrastructure is made possible by the transformation of matter. That is, I don't know exactly in English, in Italian is conglomerato bituminoso. And I cannot remember the English translation, sorry. But actually, so there is a new type, and there are many close-ups.
I doubt it exists.
It exists. I can tell you it exists, but right now let's keep out in my mind. Anyway, there are several close-ups of this conglomerato bituminoso, and actually it starts with another very interesting sequence, that is road made of dust. And so the comments start the movie saying, in the past years, our road were like that, so dust, covered with dust. Now, with this new matter, we can add new infrastructure, and we have new forms of mobility. The focus on matter is quite crucial in the movie of this period. And obviously, matter is quite different. I mean, there are intrinsic differences in matter. So there are different solutions to visualize these different types of matter. But we can have several examples concerning this problem and this issue. And actually, I think that, as for instance, Rifornimento nelle stazioni di servizio, one of the cartoon I shown in my presentation, there is, I mean, a need to make this new matter familiar to customers and spectators as well. So modernity means many different things, obviously, but one of these things is to become familiar with a revolution in matter, in everyday matter. So from, I mean, fuels and hydrocarbon, this is really the topic of my paper, but actually with many other things, just to up to, I mean, the new composition, I mean, the new atomic composition of matter. So the possibility to modify matter from the inside. And so Maupin was, I cannot remember the scientist, I mean, who invented actually this isotactic molecule, but actually she won a Nobel Prize for this. So there is a direct intervention in the matter, within the, inside the matter. And so there is really a new matter that that comes to light in modernity. And I think my colleagues, and especially perhaps Lucia, who is in our unit dealing with myth and narrative, but actually also in the oil epic of the beginning of the 60s, this connection between the antiquities, the archaeological heritage of Italy and southern Italy especially, and the new industries and the new structure and the new buildings is clearly highlighted. In many films, there is a compelling editing between, I mean, Greek temples and new plants, for instance. So, and they are clearly and explicitly compared by the voiceover and even by the editing that edit together pillars and tanks and so on. So in this movie there is the idea of recovering the heritage of the past and to convert it in towards the future.
Thank you, Giacomo.
Okay, I think I'm going now. And first of all, thank you very much, Francesco Pitasio, for your question, because the last one, I think it gives me the possibility to say something about an issue that I was already working on it. And mainly it is the, let's say, the ambiguity towards the idea of modernity that these documentaries somehow show. Because from one hand, the development of Southern and especially the development of course, mobility, and as I try to show in this reciprocity with media, is something that underline this new modernity of Southern. And it is interesting from my perspective that mass tourism is like the signal that finally Southern Italy is becoming a modern place. But at the same time, in the narrative and also in the ideological discourse about this modernity, Southern Italy still is a place somehow different and excluded, let's say, from the chaos of modern life of North cities, etc. So it is interesting from my perspective that tourism is something in which you can see both these tendencies in the description and in the also representation of South. And it is interesting that I think in the documentaries mainly focused on tourism, that this ambiguity is not represented by the alternatives between, for example, ruins or archaeological heritage and modernity like transportation, but mainly on the relationship between mobility, for example, and the nature. So the earth and the earth fruits and the sun and everything with this link to the nature and let's say the pure aspects of the southern nature. And somehow this leads me also to your second question, which actually this was something I didn't have in mind, this topic actually, but when you asked me about the question of gender and this relationship between sea or earth and land, I tried to recall a documentary that I saw while Giacomo was speaking, I went on our huge file, but I was not able to find it because I remember, but I'm not able to say, to name the title, a documentary in which there was a precise description of bikini and of how women now can, let's say, undress this is interesting also from a landscape perspective, because the beach is the place where this union, this link, this encounter between sea and land happens, and it happens in these new forms of life that in the beach take form. So actually it is something that, your question opens me a new perspective, and thank you very much, because it was really something I didn't, actually I've seen this, but I was not thinking about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. And it's very important to focus our attention on the mythological element of these movies, because mythological elements in these movies are, in a certain sense, in a dimension of reification. Mythological element became things that public can use to build the new modernity, the new aspect of southern Italy, because the result of this movie is, above all, that the sacred is desacralized, and became a thing that we can use, that we can look by another side, different than in past. This is important. It is important also the reference to the gendered, and I think to a movie in our corpus of a film, of a movie, titled, if I remember well, Rapido del Sud. In this film, in internal of a train, there are some girls, and the girls are, in a certain sense, the new version of the old, of the ancient mermaids. And the myth, in this case, also in other films, in other movies, I think to Gela Antica e Nuova, for example, and the women or figure of a woman is a metamorphic dimension. This is important for the transformation of the aspect of the new southern Italy.
Thank you, Lucia. And Massimiliano?
Thank you very much, Francesco, for your questions. And about my presentation about your question about the impact of immigration on society. Of course, in a large part of the documentaries I explored, and of course even in newsreels I didn't include in my presentation, we can't find any attention to the impact. It's exactly the contrary. They try to cast a shadow on all the kind of problems connected to immigration. So all these documentaries, I mean the first group of documentaries I mentioned, were part of a kind of intertextual group of media involved in promoting immigration. We could consider not only cinema, fiction, not only documentaries and newsreels, but also periodicals. For instance, I noticed how in a periodical like Domus, an architecture periodical, or Le Vie d'Italia, connected to tourism, we can find during the late 40s and during the 50s special attention to the promotion of immigration with advertising about ships.
Sorry for interrupting you. Immigration outside of Italy or to northern Italy?
No. Particularly for
transatlantic immigration.
For overseas destinations, yes, of course. It's very important considering how immigration depicted in these documentaries mirror in some ways what happened in immigration, the Italian immigration, because of course we can find different moments. For instance, after World War II until the early 50s, we can find a strong attention to Latin America, especially with Argentina, with the Peronist government. It was particularly interested in immigration. But then with the failure of the 5-year plan by Peron, we can find a different direction. So we can find mass exodus towards Northern Europe and of course Northern Italy. So it's very important considering the different phases of this movement. And anyway, about the impact on society, it's interesting that in some cases television, with some surveys, with some products such as Meridionale a Torino by Ugo Zatterin in 1961, or another interesting product made in 1955 about a Sicilian immigrants returning from United States in Sicily. Television in some ways paid attention to the impact on society, of course, without analyzing the effects. I mean, not directly. And then I think that according to my corpus of films, I think it's just in the late 60s that we can find an analysis of this phenomenon. You mentioned Goffredo Folfi. Of course, it's part of a larger interest from the intelligentsia, Italian from Italian scholars. I would dare to try to compare what happened in immigration with what happened with urban speculation. I think that even in this case, during the 60s, it's just during the 60s that documentaries paid attention to the effects of urban speculation. But during the 50s, it's quite difficult finding non-fiction films stressing the destruction of the Italian landscapes. Just during the 60s. So I think it's part of a cultural movement, of course. This attention to the impact. I would just to stress another element. Of course, my topic it can't be limited to the south of Italy, but anyway is part of the anthropology of the south. I think about how immigration is very present in a seminal novel like Carlo Levi, Christ Stopped at Eboli. It's a very important text, as we know, for cinema, Italian cinema, for Italian culture, even inspiring Italian documentaries. And there, it's very interesting, the presence of the multiple references to emigration, speaking about people from Gaiano, one of the towns described by Levi, and this idea of emigrants returning back in Basilicata, like a kind of revenants, you know, it's like a kind of they were considered like dead, and one can find this kind of connection between the emigrants and the dead in a very interesting study by Vito Teti, a book titled Terra Inquieta, about the anthropology of Calabria. In this case, it's very focused on this particular connection between emigration and death, that is experienced like with sorrow, you know, just like the journey of the dead. And about your connection between ruins and modernity, I don't want to add other points because my colleagues already stressed this point. Anyway, just to say that during my my research, I put the attention on some ruins, of course, on the depiction of some ruins, and in one of the documentaries I mentioned, speaking about the emigration, Buon Lavoro Sud by Giovanni Cecchinato, we can find this strong comparison between ruins and the positive effect of the industries in Sicily. So between the Valle dei Templi and the representation of the temples in Sicily and the new industries, and the same we can find during the 50s with the area of Metaponto in Basilicata. Okay.
Thank you so much, Massimiliano. So now I would leave room for further questions from the audience, if there are any. You want to ask a question, or you were included in our group? Yes. I don't know if somebody. All right, please.
No, no, I don't have this. I was not prepared to ask a question.
We framed
I thank you. Yes, no, thank you all for your talks. They were all very interesting. And this is not a period of Italian history that I'm familiar with, so it's a lot of new information for me. So I think I'm still processing and digesting it. Yeah. I mean, I guess I will just ask, like, what is the next phase of this project, of the PRIN project, and yeah, I mean, I think some of you said that you were just beginning of the research, and what the next presentation might be, or what the yeah what the next meeting of this project might be.
That's a huge question and very difficult to answer, I guess. I don't know. Basically, we are, as Angela already mentioned earlier, we have collected several films and videos about the issue of the transformation of Southern landscape in between 1948 and 68. So we are in process of finalizing this huge archive, huge database, and transform it into something else. But yes, this is the second part of our research, and so we are concluding the first one, and we need to discuss deeper and further what we need to do for the second part. But actually, yes, the idea is to transform this huge database into an accessible one with guided path, and that start from our key terms, the key terms of each unit, that we have introduced before, and then to try to create interpretive path according to the topic of the transformation of southern landscape. I don't know exactly. Maybe the 17th of November there probably will be something in Palermo, but this is self-promotion, so I want to skip this part. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. No, actually, speaking of Palermo, I'm also curious if there's an emphasis or if you found a lot of material also about the Tunisian kind of, yeah, this like in-between zone, or the different generations of kind of migration, and the, I mean, I just know that there's an emphasis in Palermo of this multicultural and diverse mix. And so I'm wondering if that's one of the things that is promoted, that you will promote on November 7th, or if that's a part of your research that you found stimulating.
We, I mean, just speaking about Palermo, the Palermo unit, we are just focusing on southern Italy, and more specifically, not only, but specifically on Sicily. Maybe in next month we will try to enlarge our scope to including a broader Mediterranean area, but still just talking about southern Italy, or even just talking simply about Sicily, is a lot of work, just because there are, well, I mean, there are plenty of documents and documentaries testifying this transformation, and the time span we have, 20 years is quite big considering that time. So with a lot of film production by different subjects, different producers, and so on. So we have so many materials that it's quite hard to...
Yes, no, I don't mean that you should do more. I think I didn't frame my question. I think my question was a little bit, vague. Maybe I'm thinking about this kind of almost like confusion, like racial confusion between, from what I understand it, of the north towards this area of the south, and seeing Southern Italians sometimes as a kind of continuity with the African like continent, almost, like this almost switching of where Sicily belongs geographically. This is something I know, I think, more from the research of like social geographers. So I know there's someone, Ilaria Gideoni, who was working on it. I know her from Berkeley, but this kind of perception of Southern Italians sometimes as like other, right? So in that sense, I think your project is obviously addressing that. And so I was just curious if it was like, if you had found instances where, these mixed families, or like almost like Arab Italian comes to the fore, identity comes to the fore.
But if I may, Simona,
yes, please.
And I don't belong to the project. I've been partly working on the topic, but not as much and as thoroughly as our colleagues and speakers. But the main endeavor in the post-war era is rather to advocate for an incorporation of Sicily into the broader nation of Italy, rather than projecting it towards the African shores. So I think of a documentary. It is in 1953. It's called Sicilia 53 by Paolucci, if I'm not mistaken, which is all about the modernization of the landscape and the construction of entirely brand new buildings for common purposes, such as hospitals, factories, roads, and so forth. Or the documentary which Giacomo partly talked about, that is Gela 59 by Vittorio De Seta, is about the fact that the industrial plants for extraction of the oil are located not just on the Po plains as the one for the methane, but also on the shores of the southern shores of Sicily. The issue is rather, and this is something I would have liked to ask to all the four speakers, if a more critical perspective ever emerges as regards the contradictory modernity of the southern Italy. And I think of a novel which made me really burst out of laughter, at the same time is so tragic, that is Donnarumma va all'assalto by Ottero Thieri, who is one of the key intellectuals of modernity and industrial literature, but at the same time he's so lucid in pinpointing the pitfalls of modernity itself as regards the translation or relocation of industrial plants and methods by Olivetti in the whereabouts of Naples. So it doesn't work the same way as in Ivrea, and it's very contradictory. And at the same time, the anthropological categories are different, which does not mean better or worse. They're simply not the same as in Ivrea. And it doesn't work the same way. You need to cope with that. So I was wondering whether in the documentary film production, this alternative anthropology and contradictions of modernity are ever highlighted. I guess the silence doesn't mean yes.
Okay. No, please, Massimiliano. Yes, go on.
No, you mentioned a very important issue, and speaking about the Olivetti techno films. Of course, I was considering. I didn't think about speaking about the connection between ruins and modernity. Of course, the area of Pozzuoli, where Olivetti was located in the areas in suburbs of Naples. In some documentaries, I was thinking about Nello Risi's documentaries made for Olivetti. That is very strong. Even in my opinion, is very strong. Even the presence of this attention to anthropology, this dialogue between the modern inhabitants and the ancient inhabitants, especially in the fish market. So there are very interesting connections, not only about we talked about the comparison between ruins and in industries, of course, but it's very interesting even this insight in the representation of the inhabitants. So how modernity influence inhabitants. In the case of Olivetti, of course, in Olivetti films, we see a perfect connection between the southern landscape and the Olivetti industries. The presence on the sea, the presence surrounded by the industry, surrounded by nature. So in this case, in Nello Risi's films, I noticed even a special attention to the impact, a positive impact in this case on the population. So an anthropological gaze, aiming anyway at pointing out the beneficial effects.
Thank you, Massimiliano. So if there are no more questions from the audience, I guess
Simone Dotto raised the hand, and Paolo Villa too. I see.
I don't see that. How can you?
I opened.
Oh yeah. All right. I got it. Yeah. Please, Simone, and then Paolo.
Hi everyone. Thank you for your presentation. I just have a question, and I realize as I'm asking it that I'm going to ask it in English, but please feel free to answer in Italian if you want to, because I can see from there that most of the audience is Italian, or at least fluently speaks Italian. So, I will keep this English discussion going. I don't want to interrupt it. And I have two curiosities about all the corpus, the whole corpus you presented in in your contribution. The first one is kind of close to what you have already discussed in terms of imagery, working on and doing some research on non-fiction cinema myself, and especially on industry films. I come to the conclusion that most of the time the southern lands of Italy are treated in a rhetorical and discursive on a rhetorical and on a discursive level quite similarly to the lands of, for instance, former African colonies, of anything that could be widely associated to something with an exotic feeling, with like I don't know, wild. Can be associated to wilderness. I mean, it's not so explicit, but I will say that there is actually some kind of colonial gaze in a way, even in southern Italy, especially when it comes to industry and when it comes to modernization, rhetorics of modernization. And the second curiosity I had is just related to your project as a whole, since it's entitled Archivi del Sud. I was wondering if you stumbled upon some archival corpus which you didn't expect at first, because also I'm referring to the work I've been doing with Francesco himself and Paolo Villa and Rossella Catanese for the Victory project. And my impression is that besides the archival heritage of the institution we already know, and something you probably investigating into also, like the Lucia archive of the Archivio Nazionale Cinema Impresa and so on, there are several hidden archival corpus on parts of the archival heritage that can be discovered as you are doing reason and maybe you didn't expect. So I was curious to know how it works in, especially considering let's say southern film heritage in non-fiction cinema, if you stumble on anything interesting in the sense. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to answer the second question because I had some noises here during the first one, so I'm going to leave it to my colleagues. And about this, the idea of how to explore these archives, and if we encounter something new or something unexpected, I just want to share with you what was our first huge difficulty, which means that this project started during the period that everyone knows. The lockdown and and so let's say that this part of the research is something that we are doing actually in this phase, and in the earlier phase we had to work on materials that were available online, that could become available, getting in touch with the different institutions. And something, what really, let's say, what's the real difficulty was also to acknowledge that the content and the material is very, very, it's very huge, I would say. And so actually one of the, just to share with you also our work in progress, one of the issue we had to face is also how to choose this material and how to decide what is important, or at least what should be central to our research and what not. And that's why as Giacomo was saying earlier, one of the aspects is to create, one of the goals of the project is to create paths through this material, because we want, let's say, we want to explore conceptual, the conceptual pair I was mentioned, and also because, and in this way I'm going to link myself to a a comment in the chat, one of the aspects is also of the project, one of the goals of the project is also to create bridges between non-fiction and fiction cinema of that period. So, and we think that paths and conceptual paths could be a way to manage this very important amount of material. Thank you.
Io mi prendo la responsabilità di parlare in italiano, cogliendo l'invito di Simone, e aggiungo anch'io qualcosa rispetto alla sua domanda. Lo ringrazio per la domanda, anzi, e ovviamente anch'io confermo quello che dicevano anche Angela e Giacomo rispetto al lavoro d'archivio. È chiaro che il nostro lavoro è il frutto di un'esplorazione, come si può immaginare, di questo repertorio enorme, come ricordava Angela, che apre si apre in continue direzioni. Con l'unità napoletana di cui faccio parte, dopo diciamo una lunga esplorazione di questo materiale, ci stiamo concentrando sulle techerai, che è un corpus ancora tutto da esplorare, almeno per quello che riguarda la rappresentazione del Sud, e ovviamente confermo, come si può immaginare, la difficoltà ovviamente di accedere a questi luoghi nell'ultimo anno, però ecco, insieme agli archivi che citava Simone, come l'archivio del cinema di impresa, che sono fondamentali, stanno facendo un meritorio lavoro di diffusione anche online di questi lavori. Nel mio caso la nuova direzione di ricerca che sto intraprendendo riguarda proprio la televisione, che nel mio intervento ho citato soltanto veramente di passaggio, perché mi sono concentrato sui documentari, ma per quello che riguarda la rappresentazione del Sud, credo che possa nascondere, è un giacimento che credo possa nascondere diverse sorprese, diverso materiale.
Grazie mille.
Allora, Paolo, una domanda telegrafica, perché siamo già oltre le 4. Scusate, mi sono preso anch'io, mi sono arrogato il diritto di parlare in italiano. Dopo 3 ore di lezione e 2 di convegno. Vai, Paolo.
Sentite?
Sì.
Yes. No, in fact, the first question by Simone was very, very much close to my question, so he has already made it. It was just, especially for Angela, a question about this representation of landscape, as she was mentioning at the end of her contribution, this vision in the distance of the landscape. So this appropriation in through the distance, through the distant vision, which is typical of tourism. And I was wondering if you are considering other sources of representation of landscape, like photography, photo inquiries, and so on, because I'm doing more or less the same thing for Friuli in the same years in the last few months, in order to get a new image, the image of the people living in the landscape, the inner perspective of the inhabitants, stripped down of all the stereotypes and cliches that have been accumulated through touristic images and all these kinds of things that are revealed, for example, by inquiries, photo reportage, for example, by photographers, which of course there is a huge corpus on South Italy, if you are considering consider that sources also in relation to the films.
Eccomi, sarà telegrafica, questa volta anche in italiano. Questo, Mara, hai toccato un tasto proprio caldo, nel senso, perché proprio l'altro ieri abbiamo fatto una riunione in cui si parlava appunto di un fondo, di provare appunto ad allargare anche ad altri, appunto alla fotografia, e ovviamente lì come giustamente concordo molto con quello che diceva Massimiliano, che la cosa più incredibile è che continuamente poi si aprono strade e possibilità come dire, di approfondimento. Volevo solo dire una cosa che così mi permette anche di precisare un punto che ho già toccato, che quest'idea proprio della modernità e quindi dello sguardo d'insieme attraverso cui si fonda il paesaggio è strettamente correlato, cioè la modernità è anche questo oggettivare in qualche modo lo spazio, è fondativo proprio della modernità, e quindi a me interessa anche molto in realtà quello che dici tu, capire se ci sono anche altri modi di rappresentare lo spazio e di rappresentare la modernità che in qualche modo esulano da questo diciamo così, da questa attitudine oggettivante. Ci sono casi, devo dire, però non strettamente legati al turismo, che invece, almeno per insomma, il corpus che fin qui ho esaminato, soffre ancora un po' dello stereotipo in cui appunto la bellezza e la natura, ripeto, come dicevo prima, sono due facce, un po' due medaglie, due facce opposte dello stesso processo di modernizzazione.
Sì, certo, grazie.
Se posso aggiungere
sì.
Una considerazione a proposito della fotografia, sì, appunto Angela citava questa riunione che abbiamo avuto l'altro ieri. Nello specifico effettivamente ci sono dei fondi proprio in Sicilia, al CRICD, noi dell'unità di Catania come anche quella di Palermo abbiamo come riferimento per quanto riguarda gli archivi soprattutto il CRICD della Filmoteca e la Fototeca. E sono dei fondi fotografici, questa non è la prima volta che io mi trovo a interrelare, a mettere in rapporto il cinema con la fotografia, l'ho fatto per il muto, ma soprattutto perché i film di cui mi occupavo non esistevano più. Però adesso, per quanto riguarda questa specifica ricerca, abbiamo trovato che alcuni fondi fotografici che non sono relati al cinema, ma che riguardano tutt'altro, cioè la documentazione della trasformazione della città fatta da persone insospettabili, sono molto importanti, cioè da persone che con il cinema non hanno nulla a che fare, e anzi c'è un rapporto di rispecchiamento continuo che andrebbe indagato in fondi che sono molte volte, mi dispiace dirlo, anche dimenticati.
Sì, grazie, no, sono d'accordo anch'io.
Rispondo in maniera telegrafica a Paolo mostrando quello che per puro caso ho sulla mia scrivania, un libro di Arturo Zavattini, fotografo in Lucania, e Reading Magnum, un libro sulla società Magnum Photos, perché evidentemente è una connessione, e Francesco nel suo libro sul neorealismo l'ha detto magnificamente, c'è una connessione molto forte nel sud Italia, pensando a quello che fa Cartier-Bresson, ai lavori di David Seymour, agli strani incroci con Carlo Levi, con Cesare Zavattini. Veramente l'immagine del sud, così come è stata rappresentata su riviste internazionali come Life, dai grandi fotografi Magnum negli anni 50, andrebbe veramente esplorata, perché l'impatto ovviamente dello stile Magnum è forte.
Paolo, ti vengo a cercare a casa, hai aperto il vaso di Pandora. Dai, Giacomo. ultima battuta, poi dobbiamo davvero chiudere.
No, scusate, anch'io voglio essere rapidissimo, solo in realtà era per rispondere anche alla domanda di Simone prima. Era la prima parte della domanda a cui è rimasta un attimo inevasa sulla questione di un orientalismo in un unico paese, poi alla fine, quindi dello sguardo coloniale. E anche per quello che tu dicevi, Francesco, e ti ringrazio ancora per questa ulteriore suggestione, per la seconda cosa, sugli sguardi critici. Mettendo insieme queste due cose, se volete, un caso esemplare è un filmato che ha già citato Lucia, che è Gela Antica e Nuova, dove appunto c'è la questione dell'eredità archeologica sottosuolo che viene riportata alla luce in tutta una serie di forme abbastanza particolari e peculiari, di cui il commento di Leonardo Sciascia. E quindi già nel 1964 noi ci troviamo in una spartiacque in cui quell'euforia, quell'estasi della tecnica e della modernità lascia già il posto a una visione molto più critica e malinconica di quello che si perde. Ecco. Quindi anche di quell'orientalismo in alcuni film, in moltissimi film lo abbiamo, ma poi ci sono appunto sguardi dall'interno che provano a ribaltare quella dimensione. E Gela Antica e Nuova io credo che sia un film fondamentale da questo punto di vista, e che oltretutto tiene insieme più o meno tutte le nostre linee di ricerca, e che quindi vi invito anche a guardare, che lo si trova tranquillamente in rete.
E su questo auspicio e sintesi, che mi pare il perfetto suggello, vi ringrazio davvero per le bellissime presentazioni, anche per la discussione, insomma, che mi pare proficuamente più che vivace. Grazie davvero.
Grazie.
Thanks
Grazie
to
a voi.
everybody.
Grazie
Thank you
a
very much.
tutti.
Grazie,
E a presto. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.